Welcome to everybody like church. That's good. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can we do it again? Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Yeah, all right. So welcome to the session. It is Fail Me Not, Realities of Today's Career Choices. And, we're glad that you all came today. We really appreciate it. I want to get a sense of the room, so it'll help me to kind of direct the questions. Could you raise your hand if you are a current student at a college or university, whether it's undergraduate or graduate? Okay, there's a lot. Okay, could you raise your hand if you have recently graduated within the last 5 to 7 years, and you're in the kind of the early stages of your career? Okay. All right, and raise your hand if you are a person who may be considering some version of a career change and want to get a sense of what that transition might look like. No one. That's great. Okay. Was there someone? There was some in the back. Okay, good. Okay, I want to, if you raise your hand if you didn't see yourself included in any of the groups that I just described, but you would like to have your perspective in the room. Yeah. Could you? What perspective would you like?
Continuing professional.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else have it? Yeah.
I'm just putting on an institute, and I want to find out what young people are interested in.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. So those of you who are looking for a job, make sure you turn around. Anybody's looking for work, because we know that everybody has to get their hustle on. That's part of the work. But I just want to make sure that we have everyone's perspective as much as possible. So thank everybody. If there's anyone else who feels like they're not included in any of those groups. Okay. Fantastic. Well, we'll begin by, I want to give the panelists a moment to introduce themselves. My name is Kollene Washington. I'll go last and give my own story, but I'd really like you guys to have the floor. So I'll have them all introduce themselves and take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to share a little bit about your experience and how you have transitioned all the different times in your lives as many of you have. So please.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Jenkins. I'm an associate dean at Oberlin Conservatory. I know lots of you either because you're from Oberlin or because you went to the Sphinx Performance Academy, for which I was the dean for about 7 years. I'm a violist. I'm an educator and administrator. I've been at Oberlin for about 4 years. My duties there are, besides serving as an associate dean for academic support, I'm also a deputy Title IX coordinator. I was trained as a Title IX coordinator, so I work with some of the most difficult issues on campus. I work with faculty on curriculum. I chiefly work with students who have academic and social and emotional issues that may impede their progress in class. So basically, working on retention and performance, trying to make sure that everybody graduates. That's my main job. So I run tutoring programs. I do a whole variety of things. I also work as the Conservatory's first liaison to our Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the college, which is a new position that I was able to create when I was actually added on staff. Prior to that, I worked with Sphinx in a variety of arenas. I was an administrator, I was an artist, I was a competition laureate. I was a freelancer in New York for about a decade, played on Broadway, played in regional orchestras, ICSM orchestras, did all the things that one does, taught in local community schools, all those things. I went to Manhattan School of Music. I went to NEC for a master's in viola, went to Harvard for undergrad. Then I actually turned around and got an international affairs master's from Columbia. And I spent a lot of time working in the Middle East. I bring students to Jordan every winter and returned from that trip about 2 days ago. So my head is screwed on kind of backwards right now, time-wise. But I teach in Afghanistan. I was at the Afghan National Institute of Music this summer as a guest artist. I have a lot of interest in international engagement as well as domestic engagement in communities of color.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrice Jackson. I was a Sphinx winner years ago. I don't like to say the year anymore. Man, I'm old. But I'm originally from St. Louis. I went to Yale and Juilliard. All that stuff you can look up later. But what I think is a little bit more interesting is what happened once I graduated. To some people, it seems as though that I fell off the face of the earth a little bit, just because I wasn't performing as much as I had hoped to when I graduated. So I just want to talk about that journey that led me to now teaching at Berklee. What happened was I found myself in a little bit of a transition and wanted to stay in New York. I had the dream of being a New York musician and also a soloist, but I was not able to go back home to St. Louis. My parents were like, no, we can't afford for you to go back home. So because of this network that Sphinx has built, I was able to not be homeless and not be starving because of people being able to be in the contracting kind of world, which Chris just briefly talked about. So I freelanced for a while also doing regular retail jobs, trying to make ends meet. And then eventually, I landed a gig to be a part of CAMI. I was signed to CAMI for a few years, and it was a beautiful thing. But what came out of that was I got a chance to work with a gentleman named Mark O'Connor. So that was my entrance into this different world that was not classical, but seemed classical. While I was at Juilliard, I did have a couple of opportunities to work with artists in the R&B and hip hop world, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But working with Mark really opened up quite a few doors, including teaching at his summer camp, which also led to the relationship of Berklee, and then later allowed me to teach there. I'm currently the associate professor of cello at Berklee. I recently was promoted to full-time just this past September, and thank you. And I feel very honored and fortunate and blessed to have that position. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's pretty much my journey.
Okay. My name is Dana Kelly. I believe in the brochure it says I play violin, but spoiler alert, I play viola. I'm currently in a quartet. It's called the Argus Quartet, and we are the graduate quartet in residence at the Juilliard School. I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and I played violin as a hobby, basically. And then I attended Vanderbilt University, where I didn't know where music was going to take me, so I chose a place where I could balance a liberal arts career with a music career. But I started playing viola around my junior year of college and fell in love with it, so decided I needed to keep playing. So after Vanderbilt, after I graduated, I went to the New England Conservatory, where I got a master's in viola performance. And then I moved to New York City, where I joined SphinxConnect, as it's now known, which is a program run by the Juilliard School, Carnegie Hall, and the Weill Music Institute. And it's a 2-year fellowship program with usually around 18 musicians, and it focuses on chamber music and community engagement and teaching artistry. So we did tons of activities around New York City, including teaching in public schools, playing in incarceration facilities, playing at adults with Alzheimer's facilities, as well as performing kind of standard concerts at Carnegie Hall and at the Juilliard School. So that was really awesome. And that finished for me in the summer of 2016. And then I was kind of like, I don't know what I'm gonna do next. So I knew I wanted to stay in New York, and I was just starting to freelance. And the Argus Quartet had a viola opening, and they contacted me. So we met in the fall of 2016, and then they fell in love and hired me about a year ago. They were in residence at Yale, so I was going back and forth with them for a little while. Yeah, and that's that. And then we auditioned for Juilliard, and that's where I am now. So doing that as well as continuing my freelance career in New York.
And then Kollene Washington. I'm originally from, right? What? They gave me the good mic. I'm originally from Dallas, Texas, born and raised there. Hootie hoo. Thank you. I grew up in what most people would consider to be an underserved community. My background was, basically growing up and living in poor black neighborhoods. And when I was in middle school, I went to my middle school and I wanted to be in band because my sister had been in band. She played clarinet. my band director says, I go in, I'm like, I want to play percussion, and me and my dad were talking about it, and he's like, I want you to play saxophone, and my band director comes out and gives me a bassoon. And I was like, so what is that? He's like, well, it's a bassoon. And I didn't really question it. I just wanted to be in band because my sister had been in band, so I started playing bassoon. And I got pretty good, but I was never great. I wasn't a kid who made All-State. And when I graduated from high school, I went to the University of Texas as a chemical engineering major. And right after my first semester there, I switched from chemical engineering to bassoon, actually music ed. I wanted to be a band director. And I shifted from there. I had this great conversation with my undergraduate teacher. Her name is Kristen Wolf Jensen. She was transformative for me, and she told me, she said, listen, if you want me to teach you like someone who is not going to be a serious musician, I'll do that. But you have the potential to be a serious musician. And she's like, but you have to pick today. I'll give you the week. How you prepare for your next lesson will determine how your lessons go with me. And so I worked my butt off, and so she said, okay, I guess it's time to go. And that soon after then, I switched my major to bassoon performance. I went to the Manhattan School of Music for grad school. When I finished there, I got a job playing principal bassoon in the Shanghai Broadcasting Orchestra, but my mother got really sick in Dallas, so I just moved home for a year. While I was there, it was just a weird time, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with myself, so I told myself I'm giving myself one more year, and if I don't get another job on bassoon, I'm out. I'm leaving the game. But this year, I'm going to practice 8 hours a day, and that's going to be my job for this year, and I'll give it the old college try, and if it doesn't work out, it's not because I didn't try. That year, I ended up getting a job playing bassoon in the Houston Grand Opera, and a few months later, I was offered a position to be the bassoon professor at the University of Missouri. So I'm this 26-year-old kid I chose the college job because I always wanted to do that. So I'm a 26-year-old kid. I go teach at this university, taught at the University of Memphis from there. And as I moved into that work, and I can tell a story later, probably over drinks, about what happened for me as it relates to a great patron supporting my development. But the stipulation was I had to give back to my community. And so when I got to Memphis, it was a 65% black town. Their poverty rate was extremely high in the black community. And that was a city where I was made to be here. So I created programs in Memphis, and that allowed me to really learn a lot about just the work. Not just about my own work and my own playing, but about the work and what our work could mean for the world. And I did that for a while. I did some consulting work. I built a teaching artist program there that is amazing with an organization called the Memphis Music Initiative. I started my own organization called the Prism Ensemble, and I did that for about 13 years or so, that work, and I just recently, as of August, took over as executive director of the Community Music Center of Boston. And so that's my new role, and I'm slowly but surely transitioning into this role where people don't actually know me as a bassoonist. Which is very strange for me that my playing doesn't speak for me all the time. But it's exciting, though, because I do have these other things. I find out that I have these other things that can speak for me, too. And so that's really an exciting new journey that I'm on now. So let's begin the questions with, let me make sure I've got them up here. One of the challenges that we have, and I think this is happening around the country, there are colleges and universities, and even there was a panel here, where they are trying to, they're understanding that the things that we're learning in music school aren't necessarily completely preparing musicians for their lives outside of music school. And I know that the colleges and conservatories are tackling that, but my question for this group is, can you share a few of the skills that you've kind of developed over time that you didn't learn in music school, and maybe talk about the ones you wish you had learned in music school that would have prepared you for that very next step?
I'll go. I talk to my students a lot and share stories because there is this thing, especially in the gig world, where we don't necessarily talk about these unspoken rules. It's just contractors, just watch and just wait. And if you do the wrong thing, thank you so much for your services. They're no longer needed. So those are the skills that I like to share with my students, just so they're better prepared once they graduate and get that call, that they know exactly what to do so they make sure they get that coin at the end of the day. I learned a lot of my gig rules from this network. I'm not going to name drop, but there's quite a few people that I pay homage to even to this day, that made sure that I had the opportunity to start gigging. But after learning what to do, I was able to get that call, that next call, and then that next call, and then that next call. And I watch people get that first call, and then I don't see them again. I'm like, man, dang, there's another one, Lord. You know, skills that I learned outside of the gig world that I wish I would have learned in school is how to network, number one, and how the business side of music works. As a college student, that was impeccable. I went to school with a young lady that is now a part of the Sphinx administrative part of Sphinx. And she and I were in school together, and she had this great idea of starting her own business. I'm like, girl, how you gonna do that? And she stuck with it, she graduated, and now her company is so popular that people are flocking to her at this point, like, yo, can I get put on the list? Can I get put on the list? Can I get put on the list? So those are the things that I wish now, when I was in school, we would talk about. More schools are actually doing that at this point, and you know, finding the importance of the business side of music. But when we were coming along, I wish I would have known that.
Dana, would you mind talking a little bit just about, as a recently graduated person, some of the things that you're just starting to uncover right now as a person who's new into your career?
This kind of goes off what you were saying as well. In school, I think for all of us who went to conservatories, or didn't, as I didn't, I did both, but I think a lot of times what you hear is go practice more. And that is extremely important. Of course, you want to be the master of your instrument. But it's really distracting to only think about practicing and not think about what you're actually going to do with this art that you love so much. And it's funny because actually a class I took at NEC really helped me realize what I wanted to do with my life. And it was a community engagement class. And I did it with a string quartet I was playing with at NEC just for school credit. And one thing we did was work on our speaking from the stage, which I had never done before and didn't think anybody really cared about. And I realized how much I enjoyed that and how much it made me enjoy playing my instrument more and helped me look for opportunities to keep doing that, to whether it was from the stage or speaking to an audience in a nursing home or speaking to children in a school. I was like, wow, this means so much more to me than sitting in a practice room by myself practicing my Bartok concerto, which no one really wants to hear. So, I'm kidding, everyone wants to hear Bartok concerto. But, yeah, so I think it's funny because I actually did get that opportunity in school, and I think I was very lucky to have that class that put me in that position. But I think it's rare for someone to be in a university or a conservatory telling you to do something that's not just playing your instrument, and to find out what resonates with you and how you can parlay that into something bigger and more meaningful for yourself.
I wanted to just address head-on the main issue that you've brought up, Kollene. So, you know, I studied music at 3 different schools. I work in administration and a conservatory. I'm very proud of a lot of the offerings that we have for our students, the training that we give our students. I think that industry-wide, the mismatch between the skills that are trained in a conservatory and the skills that students need is a huge problem. I'm going to say that again because we don't say that often enough. The mismatch between the skills that are trained in conservatory and the skills you need to be successful is a huge industry-wide problem that we have not really begun to address in a systemic way. So, as Dana was mentioning, speaking from the stage, really, really important. I never had anyone coach me on that in 3 different schools at any time. Being able to write contracts, deal with details of business, never had anyone talk to me about that. Being able to make a website, being able to make a budget, being able to come up with different revenue streams so that you can not only play your instrument, that's a given that you play your instrument, that's the baseline from which we all begin, but also can you arrange, can you improvise, can you compose, can you run the administration for your chamber group, right? Can you start an organization? All those are actually essential skills, and people who are successful usually happen to have them. We don't train those skills. And the people who are successful often happen to have them, they get to be successful. Everybody else is not. We also don't like to talk about the fact that a relatively small proportion of people who graduate from conservatories get jobs in music as performers. It could be higher if there was a better match between the training that we give and the skills that one actually needs to be successful.
That's church. But we're gonna move on to, man, I told you, okay, so full disclosure, one of the things that I said when we were prepping for today is I told them if somebody says something and, you know, they drop the mic, we're gonna move on to the next question. And yeah, so on to the next question. The next question has particularly speaks to people of color and the transitions that we go through. As a person of color, each time you go into a new space, each space has its own blend of cultural competency. There are some places you go into that are very culturally competent in one way, and there are other spaces you go into that are very culturally competent in another way. So as you're transitioning from one space to the next, you're navigating on some level not only the cultural competency of the space, but the different blend of microaggressions you're gonna have to deal with as you transition to these new spaces. So in addition to just transitioning from one role to a new role, you're also learning how to navigate the cultural competency and the microaggression of the spaces that you're moving into, which is, you know, between me, you, and everybody who's talked to me about it, that's one of the challenges with these diversity initiatives, because you have a diversity initiative, and if you have not created cultural competency inside the space you're bringing these people into, then what you're doing is you're bringing people into an oppressive environment. Next question. No, I'm kidding. What I'm going to ask everyone to just, you know, describe a little bit how you manage the different transitions that you've gone through in your career, particularly from the perspective of a person of color.
I'm happy to talk about that because I moved actually from New York to the Middle East and then to the Midwest, coming from New York and being really a real New Yorker. And the Midwest was certainly, my first time living there was one of the hardest experiences I had, because especially I live in a rural area, and there are expectations of behavior and interpretations that folks have in that area, especially some of the white residents of the town where I live, that I had never encountered before. And that was really challenging to adjust to. I think that was the hardest thing to adjust to, especially finding the best way to communicate my difficulty with my supervisor and with our human resources department to try to figure out what solution there was to that issue. When I was also one of the very few people of color working in my office, in my institution, so there weren't many other folks having these kinds of problems, right? So explaining what my problem was, understanding it myself, and understanding the mechanisms to deal with it were extremely challenging. I would suggest certainly whenever you make a career transition into a new office, a new environment, a new institution, try to figure out where your allies are if you have these kinds of issues. What offices are out there that are available for you, who you can talk to, who you should be talking to when you have issues, because you have to deal with them quickly.
Dana, did you want to add on to that?
Think about it. Yeah, I guess like most of the people in the room, I've usually been in situations where I've been the only person of color in whatever ensemble or organization I was performing with. And I think, to me, it became normal that was what I was seeing. And then I realized over time that wasn't normal, and also that people were acting a little bit differently around me because I was the other. And I think I've gotten lucky that, for the most part, I've had the opportunity to show who I am in all of these instances, and people don't have a reason to think of me as something else anymore. So I'd say that if you're in a place where you feel like you've moved to a new place, you've started a new career, you've started a new job, where you look different than someone else, or you sound different than someone else, don't let them automatically put you into a category. I've always tried to be my authentic self wherever I am, regardless of my environment, and I think that has actually worked in my favor, to be like, oh yeah, that's Dana, that's not someone else. That's not who we might have expected her to be. That's not who we've decided she's going to be. This is someone who has a real character and real personality and can do what she says she can do.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on that one too, actually, because I'm going through a transition right now, so I will speak to that one as well. When moving to Memphis was actually very profound for me because it was a city that was 65% black, and that was something that I'd never lived in a city like that. But because I was at the university, I was on some level not connected to the black community in Memphis, which was a very strange thing. And that was my first few years there. And as I started to more connect with the black community in Memphis, I really started to learn a lot about myself. Where I was at a university, I really felt that I had to code switch quite a bit. And that was, for those of you, I'm sure people know who code switching is, right? Yeah, right, sorry. I'm not always in this kind of space. Because at one conference, I actually had someone actually raise their hand and said, "I'm sorry, what does code switching mean?" So yeah, thank you. No offense meant. But that was one of the things was that I went through this period of time in which I had to code switch. And I then started working, doing different kinds of work. And so I started being in these spaces where I didn't have to code switch. And I started to really realize how smart I was and how much energy it took to code switch, how much brain power it took for me to code switch. And it was a profound experience for me when I was working with someone. I was getting ready, I was code switching, and the person I was working with said, "Wait a minute, you don't have to do that here. You don't have to do that here." And that was very profound for me, just as a person. And again, it was really challenging, I think, on some level. I'm in Memphis, which is the Deep South, and then I moved to Boston, which is, of course, in New England. And there are some things in Memphis that are very clear. The Deep South is very clear about what it is. It's very obvious what it is. It understands that its intent matches its impact. And so it's very clear. And moving to Boston has been very interesting to me because there are these wonderful, well-intentioned people, but the intent doesn't match the impact as much. And so that is, there was this big series that came out just recently in the Boston Globe about race in Boston. And that was essentially what it showed was Boston didn't just have an issue with race, it had an issue specifically with black people. And so that was really, if you have a chance it's online and it's free, if you have a chance to check out this Boston Globe series, it's really interesting series to read. But it was amazing to me how many people didn't realize those things were happening. And it was, and it uses data and metrics, and it's all in the article. And so I would recommend checking it out. But it was really interesting as I transitioned to this space where you hear all these things and it's, great, very progressive. And then you look at the impact, you look at the numbers, you look at the way the demographics shifted, you look at where resources are being utilized in the city. And it's like, wait a minute, this is actually quite similar to Memphis. There's some things there's some very similar things to Memphis, but it's wonderful for me because I'm an executive director of an organization, and so I actually have a platform to be able to call those things out. I have a platform to be able to say those things. I have a platform to be able to be disruptive and ask those really tough questions. And because I'm not just some kid at a conservatory, no offense, they feel they have to listen. And so that is a wonderful, empowering thing for me in this new role is that I'm saying things and people are actually listening. And so hopefully we'll get to a point to where the intent matches the impact and it's both in the positive. I have one more question. I had two more, but I'll only ask one. For you guys, what would you say to a student who is nearing completion of their music performance degree and they're unsure what to do next? What would you say to them, maybe if they say they're their last year or two or of an undergraduate or a master's program, what would you say, like at this moment, here is something that you might be thinking about as you are getting ready to make this first or second major transition of your life. Here are some things to be thinking about now. You want to tackle that one, Dana? Yeah.
I think the most important thing to do when you're on the cusp of a new turn is to do everything and do things that make you uncomfortable and that you think you may never do again. So, for example, I was talking about this community engagement class that I did at NEC with this string quartet. And I wasn't the one who wanted to take the class. Someone else in my group said, we should sign up for this because it's gonna look good that we've done it. And I was like, okay, cool, that sounds great. And that totally changed my life. Doing that one class made me want to apply to SphinxConnect, made me want to be in a chamber music group where we did things a little bit differently, made me want to have a career that looks much different than what I expected my career to be 6 or 7 years ago. So I think when you're in a place that has a lot of energy, has a lot of people that you can connect with who are forward thinkers, find them and do everything with them. Like I said, like regardless of whether or not you see yourself doing that in 5 years. Another example of that is when I was doing SphinxConnect, each of us was paired with a school, a public school in one of the boroughs. And we went there about once a week to partner teach and do some, I don't know, lessons kind of, but also just like show who we were to the children. And it's funny because I remember hearing that that was part of the program, and I was like, okay, we have to do this. I don't want to be a public school teacher, but it's part of the program, so I'm going to do it. And I still don't want to be a public school teacher because that's crazy difficult, but I learned so much more about myself as a musician and what makes me tick, what makes me care, how to communicate with students who've never heard classical music before, which translates to people who have heard classical music before, that translates to people who claim they don't like classical music. You know, there's so much you learn from these experiences that are invaluable. And I think that really pushing yourself to try everything is going to open you up in ways that you could never imagine.
So I wanted to chime in as well and talk from an educator standpoint. I'll tell the story, when I was at Juilliard, I went to a camp that shall remain nameless, but it was in the woods, and it was very difficult to get cell phone service. And so by the grace of God, I got this call, and it was from a African-American female violinist who I met a few years prior, and she was like, hey, I just got a call from Kanye West's people, and he wants an all-girl black female band. I need you. And I'm like, oh, I'm at this camp. They're not going to let me leave early. So I went to the head cello teacher who ended up being, who also I knew personally, and I said, listen, is there any way possible I can leave just a couple days early? I got this amazing opportunity, da-da-da. And I name-dropped who it was, and he was like, stone face. And so fast forward, the next day, he literally rolled up on me like in front of my face and said, listen, if I let you go early, will you be okay with rent? Because I was living on my own, I was still going to Juilliard. I said, sir, if you let me go, I will be straight for rent for the next couple of months off of this one gig. So he said, okay, well, it just so happens that my son is an aspiring DJ, and I said the name. I was like, do you know this person? And he was like, oh my God, Dad, oh my God. Oh, you know, so from an educator standpoint, I find it very important, especially if you're already in school. A lot of times our teachers not only don't look like us, but our private instructors, especially in the classical world, also might have some generation gaps, right? We can't expect, you know, some of these teachers, and I can only speak for cello, the great cello teachers we have still alive today, for me, they don't know who Cardi B is, or they don't know what trap music is, or they don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like, so we can't really expect, if we ask this question, what should I do, to have the same results as if we didn't have that culture, right? So my thing for my students, what I suggest, is to make sure that you go to an environment that looks like this, where you have forward-thinking people that also look like you, that are around the same generation as you. So if you come up with ideas that haven't been done before, it's not like, why would you do that? That's crazy nuts. You get what I'm saying? So, and also, along with what she was saying, is to make sure that you do things that you just don't want to think about. If you are an aspiring chamber musician, for example, I want to be in a quartet, cool. Well, I just got a call to do a recording session, but I want to be in a quartet. Now you just miss money while you're navigating and figuring out who those other musicians are going to be in that quartet. Maybe you can, while being in New York or in another city, there might be a kid that wants to have a private instructor. I don't want to be a teacher. All right, I said the same thing, and it backfired. Not backfired, but I'm doing it now. You know what I mean? Like, you know, when I was at Juilliard, I wanted to be a soloist. I ain't thinking about going on the road with any of these artists, and I ended up doing some amazing things. So just keeping all of your options open and not putting all of your eggs in one basket is my main suggestion.
Talking about making money moves.
So, you know, I work with students every day, and more it's dawned on me that students, you do not usually truly realize the value of what's in front of you when you're enrolled in an institution. It's really hard to realize. It's very easy to get siloed and to practice all day and not do much else. But what is extremely important to do is to pursue every alternative skill and talent that you, and interest that you have while you're in school. Because very often the things that are left undone when you leave school will never be done, ever. So if you have an interest in composition, you must take at least one composition class if it's available to you. You like conducting, take a conducting class. Improvisation, take an intro to improvisation class. If you don't do those things, they really may never ever happen. And most people who are successful, a lot of people who are successful, I should say, not most, but many, are skilled in a number of areas. So they can play and they can arrange. They can play and they can conduct. Or they can conduct and they can compose. Or they can administrate and they can play. It's really, really difficult to make it if you have skills in only one area, and if that area is just your chops, because everybody has chops, right? I mean, most people in this room have chops. You got to have something else. And school is where you can develop that. And actually, it's the only place for many skills.
For me, one of the things I would say is embrace your authentic self, to be honest. Do not go to school and allow yourself to commit cultural suicide, to where you lose who you are and you have to be reborn as someone else. I'm a person who experienced that. I'm a person who felt like I have to be something else in order for me to be successful. And so I kind of lost my own self. Then I had to refine myself again. And so if I was to say anything, I would say go ahead and embrace your authentic self. I'm actually on the National Board of Chamber Music America. And I'm really digging the work that's happening there. Shout out. Hey, Margaret. Margaret Leoy is the CEO of Chamber Music America. She's here. And it's been really interesting being on the board and engaging in conversations because, to be honest, I do feel that that is an organization where it is helping to guide the changes that are coming I think in our field. Though the conversations that we have at the board level are they're dope. I mean, they're way ahead of conversations that are happening in other places, and I'm really excited about that. And I would say that the field will catch up. Anybody here watch Blackish? Okay, so there's an episode of Blackish where Dre is the director of urban marketing or whatever, right? And he after a while, maybe season 4 or 5. They show he's like, well, we don't have an urban market anymore. It's just called the market now. So they showed the urban market statistics and they showed the market, and they were parallel. They had the same thing. And on some level, I think those who have an entrepreneurial spirit, the field is starting to value that. And I really see that as the future. A lot of the things that are happening right now, as far as the progressive action, is happening at the chamber music level. And so I'm really excited about that. And so those of you who are out there, do not feel that you have to you have to lose yourself in order to be successful. It could be that who you are right now is the pathway to success. And you may lose success by shifting. And so one of my students, Garrett McQueen, taught me that. And so, you might want to consider that as being a part of who you are, that who you are right now actually has a lot of value, and you do not want to lose that. So I was thinking that we would take the last few minutes to open it up to questions. We'll start. The first question will be from the floor.
Good afternoon, Charles Murphy, Babatu, St. Louis. I am a public school teacher, and wow, I've been a public school teacher since 1972. And I've had to do all of those things. My question is, will you please not forget us? Will you please not forget us in these schools? Our kids need you. Administration is trying to get rid of me, because the way they look at it, I cost more, and I have ideas that they don't want our kids to have. And I'm talking about the Negro administrators and others, and the white, who don't believe that Black lives matter. And we need you in these buildings. Find a way to get there.
So I'm going to jump on this one just because it obviously hits home, literally. But I am a product of two educators, and my dad is a very well-known orchestra director back in St. Louis. The whole state of Missouri, everybody knows my dad. He recently retired, but the school district in which is the reason why he's very well known, when he got the job to be the orchestra director, there weren't enough strings to even have a chamber orchestra. There were like 2 violins, maybe a couple violas, 1 cello, and 1 bass. And within the span of about 5 years, it grew to an actual 50-person orchestra. By the time I came along in the same school district, the high school was so big that he ended up having to split it into 2. So we had concert and symphonic orchestra. This is a district, though, that was very forward-thinking and knew the importance of the arts, period. They invested in both the the orchestra department, the band department, and the drama department, okay? So we had musicals, we had a marching band, and we had a very successful orchestra. That is not typical in our public schools. It is also important to note that on a conservatory level, again, because I think of Sphinx being so forward-thinking, we're now seeing more of us in the administrative areas and teaching. I was very fortunate to have a school like Berklee to see me, and I did not follow the typical track of what you're supposed to do or what they say you're supposed to do to get a job like that. And it's very important to understand, too, the people that came before me. I'm following Ron Crutcher and Anthony Elliott. They're both gentlemen, but we don't have Black females until now. And I can honestly say I'm very fortunate to be a part of this now family that is starting that. So I think, honestly, that it is important that we do have us as role models, but we also have to go back to our schools to make sure that the schools see that we are still around.
We have a question from Slido, and then I'll go back to the microphone. The question here, and this is one just as a point of clarification, that it received the most likes, which means it's a burning question, and I hope that there are folks from schools and institutions that are listening to this question. How can we prepare our young people in the mostly white music schools / institutions that are psychologically damaging to students of color? This is a question that came from the body. You want to yeah. Well, I think you know what. To be honest, what I will say is every one of us here has an answer to that question. It's very difficult for all of us to find the words to be able to articulate it in a public forum. I would imagine if you asked each one of us after this session, we would probably tell you something. But I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody. I'm as disruptive as they come at this point in my life. But that's real talk right there. So who wants to tackle that one? You, Chris, did you want to jump in there? Yeah.
I can talk about this a little bit. So I think what's really difficult about being a person of color who becomes accomplished, who actually gets things done and reaches their goals, there are certain characteristics those people tend to have. And I think it's not fair that it is that way, but it is that way. When I look at older black musicians that I know, or older black people I know who are successful, they're all extremely individualistic, and they're very, very strong people. And one thing you always have to do as a musician, especially a black musician, is ask yourself why you're doing this. If you're meant to be a musician, it's really in you in such a way that you have to do it. That should be why you're doing it, by the way. There's no other real reason to be doing this. If you have that in you and you rely on that, then you must always go back to that and ask yourself every day, why am I doing this? Because I know it's what I have to do. And that should hopefully will power you to get through a lot of the difficult circumstances that you will encounter as a person of color in a conservatory, because you're doing it because you need to do it. And if you really need to do it, then you're going to be able to deal with a lot of the static and the friction that you encounter. I realize that's not a strategy, and I get that back from my students of color when I tell them this. Well, you have to be tough. I'm tough. Everyone I know who succeeded is tough. This guy's tough. These folks are tough, right? You have to be really tough. I recognize that isn't enough, that more concrete strategies are necessary. I have to say, I don't know what they are. I don't always have them. I know what people who I look to who were successful role models for me, I know what they did, and they power through. Now, that isn't a sufficient explanation, but that's still where we are, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would say, did anyone else? I don't want to jump in. I don't want to cut anyone. Okay. One of the things that I would say as well is make a concerted effort to seek whatever it is that whatever grounds you, whether it's being in black and brown spaces, whether it's watching. For me, I didn't watch BET. I started watching BET again. I was like, oh yes, right, yeah. Black Card Revoked is the funniest show ever. And if you haven't watched it, you should check it out. They're not paying me. But I would say that that was being able, whatever it is that you need to be able to keep yourself grounded in who you are. I think that is, make sure you don't lose yourself, because it's really interesting to me that the text is psychologically damaging, and because that is what. And I think it's important to say that and make sure that it's out in a public forum so people understand that is what is felt, and that these things are not just metrics and numbers on a page and text. It's actual people who it hurts. People hurt. And so it's important to be able to have a place to be able to say that. I wanted to open the mic up as well if there's another question.
Hi, my name is Garrett. Thanks for the shout out, Kollene. So I was sort of a latecomer to classical music. I took my first lesson with Kollene as a freshman in college. And when I went on to grad school, I found that I was constantly having to validate myself because Juilliard, Curtis, and Yale was not on my resume. And that's a rhetoric that is reinforced everywhere, even here at Sphinx, unfortunately. What do we need to do to break down the myth that going to a conservatory is the path to a career in classical music, even in its most traditional sense?
Dane, did you want to take that one? Because you took you came from, you've run the gamut in your career. Do you want to try and jump into that one?
I can try, yeah. It's a tough one because it's true, People still look at Juilliard, NEC, Curtis, and they might think you're worth it or you're not worth it based on what they see. But I really do think that trend is dying away. And my experience at Vanderbilt was amazing because I was exposed to people who were doing things that were completely different than what I ever thought I could do. And staying in touch with people like that, who, even if they aren't musicians, are just doing fascinating projects, and then I get to be involved because I'm friends with them and I've known them since I was a freshman, I think makes my career have the possibility of being more interesting and more multifaceted. And some of the greatest musicians that I've met haven't come from Juilliard, Yale, Curtis, whatever, either. And I think also that something that it's really alluring these days is people who can do something that's different. And I'm at Juilliard right now, and I mean, I don't want to talk bad about Juilliard because it's a great place, but I know so many violin players there who are interchangeable. And at this point in 2018 and going forward, if you can play the Mendelssohn Concerto, the crap out of the Mendelssohn Concerto, it doesn't really matter, you know? You have to have something else that speaks to a wide variety of audiences. So this is, I don't really have an answer to that either, but I think it's important, and I think people are beginning to recognize really that a resume is only so much, and what you as an individual brings to the table is much more important than where you went to school. Yeah.
I'm going to take one question from here and then one more question at the mic. But we will, all four of us will hang around outside if there are additional questions for us. Everybody's cool with that? Okay. I'm going to, this is a question for Patrice, if you can answer it in 10, 15 seconds. Could you give us maybe 3 or 4 of the unspoken rules that you alluded to earlier? And we'll take, whoever was at the mic, I'll take that question, whoever was at the front. Oh, you're there, okay.
So, 3 of the rules. 1, on time is never on time. For us. For us. Okay? Number 2, if you're in a section, no matter how much you feel personally about who's in front of you, you never say anything bad about leadership. And number 3, you never say anything bad about conductors or contractors, anybody in a hiring position. And I will add number 4, the main reason of getting a call back is the way you interact with the other people you're with. It has very little to do with how well you play, because everybody plays good, especially in a city like New York, everybody's hungry. But how well do you get along with your colleagues?
One last question.
Hi, my name is Carlita. This is, I think, I had a question and then Chris kind of talked about it, but I wanted to know a little more. So I go to DePaul and we have a new dean, and he's very open to like listening to new opinions. I don't know how much he does the new opinions. I haven't figured it out yet, but he likes to listen to stuff. So I'm wondering, I think that all students should be required to take one, like, education, composition, some class, like they should be able to pick or maybe have to try all of them, but I feel like everyone should be able, it's like forced to like try something else, because everyone comes into, to school and they like want to be performers, and like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm like realist / pessimist, so I'm like, okay, like you're not all gonna get this job. So like, I think that, do you think that that it would be beneficial for a school to like require students, even, not just wait until you don't think they're gonna make it to say, have you ever thought about teaching? Or, have you ever thought about composition? Like, do you think it's important to start them off as freshmen? Like, have you looked at these things too?
Can you guys answer that one in 20 seconds or less?
Yes.
I think, especially going back to the title of this whole panel, and the myth of what teachers really are is completely changed. To go back to what you're saying, I think that would be great for everybody to explore those options. But realistically, everybody's not going to be a great teacher. Everybody's not going to be the next soloist. So just to have all these different things in the bag that you can tap into is very important. And I think especially exploring all those options in college is very necessary, so you can understand and get in that, understanding that world of, well, I really like that, or I never really thought I would be bad at it. How can I improve that skill?
Yes, of course. But that would actually requires a more robust conversation around curriculum development at the conservatory level, and that's a generational project that will take a long time to accomplish.
Wow. So in closing, thanks everybody for coming. Give a round of applause to the panelists. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. Again, we will all four of us will take a little bit of time afterwards to stand out if anyone has any additional questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all the ones here, but you can ask us outside. Everybody have a good afternoon.